Hi guys, it's Professor Fernandez, and I am so excited to talk to you about this really interesting story here. This story is called Sempervivum. It's from Gris Munoz, who is a Chicana writer, and she has graciously allowed us to use this story um, about to talk about it, frankly. So what I'm going to do is going to go through the story, what I know about the story. We're going to talk about this genre. We're going to talk about a possible symbol here. But a lot of the work you're going to do in your modules here, right? I'm not here to give you the answers to the things, but I'm here to point them out or point out the path for you, okay? And so let's go ahead and get started here. Some housekeeping here. You need a copy of the story as we go through because there may be something that you may want to mark or annotate. Pen, marker, highlighter, anything you need to take notes. And it would help if you had read this story already. I'm not going to give you a synopsis of the story. It's English class, guys. You got to read the story. All right, so here is what I want you guys to think about here. I want you guys to think about what do you think about this particular story? Um, Not that it's part of your analysis, whether you like it or not is a moot point when it comes to your analysis, but you need to say why you like it and why you don't like it. This is an interesting story. It's not like the stories that we've read so far where it's the other stories were a little bit more of a literary story. They're very, in my opinion, overtaught. This is a little bit different. So, what do you think of the story? You can send me an email if you want to give me your opinion, but it's up to you. So, before we start talking about this story, I want to talk about genre. And there's different ways of talking about genre. Genres is literally another word meaning type. What type of story this is or what type of narrative this is. So when we talk about story, whether it is a movie or a novel or a short story, we can use the word narrative. Narrative means that there's a beginning, middle, end to a story, right? You can't call a poem a narrative unless it's literally like a narrative poem. Maybe some lyrical poems because they have a beginning, middle, end, or a narrative arc, but it is a narrative. Plays have narrative arcs, so you can call them narratives, right? So, what is the genre to this narrative that we are discussing here? Well, the first level of genre that I want to talk about is literally the type of literature. Is it a poem? Is it an essay? Is it a novel? Is it a movie? No, it's a short story. So we are just dealing with short stories in this class. So boom, done, right? We know the first level of genre. It is a short story. Then we need to know the type. Is it a tragedy? Is it a thriller? Is it romantic? Is it science fiction, etc.? Well, that one is a little bit more difficult to answer because there's a big genre and then there's subclassifications to the subclassifications. So let's see what what this is, right? Clearly, if you answered sci-fi, you are correct. It's the big genre, but there's a smaller genre to that. And that smaller genre is speculative fiction. I'm going to get to speculative fiction here in a second. So I want to ask you first, what do you expect from a sci-fi story? You're probably thinking outer space and rockets and rocket ships. You're probably thinking Star Wars. If you're a fan of Doctor Who, like I am, you're probably thinking Doctor Who. But within the sci-fi genre, there's a lot of subgenres. Speculative fiction is one of them. What speculative fiction means is that the author is speculating on something and writing a story in answer to a question or an answer to a speculation. So, for example, what would happen or what would the world be like if there were no bees on the planet, if the bees stopped being, right? Um, then you would write a story thinking about or going through what would happen a day in the life of a planet with no bees. That's speculative fiction. And within speculative fiction, there's even subgenres to that. So when I say Chicano, Chicana, or Chicanx futurism, what do you think that means? Now, this is an interesting question because this is a genre or a subgenre that is relatively new, even though you've probably interacted with the sister genre before. So let's discuss a little bit about Chicano or Chicanx futurism. This is a type of speculative fiction, and it refers to the cultural production of literature, visual art, music, performance that explores the nexus of race, gender, science, technology, the environment, and the future from a Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, i.e., decolonial perspective, right? So it includes so much, not only sci-fi, but it could include fantasy, magical realism, horror, some of the things you probably don't know about, like magical realism. And unfortunately, we won't be able to get to magical realism in this class. We do in the semesters, but we don't have time in the summer. But magical realism is pretty dope. You should probably check that out. But this is what is so interesting about this type of literature, that when we talk about nexus of, it's literally it's the pinnacle. It incorporates so many layers of things, which makes it fun, also interesting, and it can be frustrating to figure out what the argument is. There may be more than one argument in this story. Let me say that again. There may be more than one argument in the story. And so the whole point of it is that you've got to think a little bit deeper. Chicana futurist works excavate and retell stories of contact, colonialism, displacement, labor, migration, resistance, and social and cultural transformation in the Americas. So when we're looking at anything that's a futurism genre, like Afrofuturism, Chicano futurism, indigenous futurism, each futurism or futuristic genre deals with the big questions, the big ideas, the big thoughts of each of those individual communities. For example, Afrofuturism will definitely deal with race. It will deal with gender. It will deal with the futuristic things dealing with African Americans. So this is really interesting because Afrofuturism or Chicano futurism is considered being a branch off of Afrofuturism. And I'm saying Afrofuturism as if you know what that is. And you actually probably do. You've actually encountered or have at least heard of it. If you have watched Black Panther, either the first or the second or both, you have interacted with Afrofuturism. So I want you to see how really young this literature is, right? It's different from, say, like a British lit type of genre or an American lit type of genre. Chicana futurism, the actual name of Chicana futurism or Chicanx futurism, was coined in 2004. It's been around longer, but that's when we actually got an actual definition, and it was coined by Dr. Catherine Pseudamides. And so I welcome you to Google the name of this particular article and take a look to see how she's defining it, and why she came to this name. So again, the futurism, especially Chicano, Chicanx, or Chicano futurism, balances sci-fi, dystopian, speculative fiction with the culture of the people, or African American people, or whatever the people are centered. So that is, again, what the definition of a futurism literature. This story specifically deals with Chicano futurism. So let's do a quick review here. We're done talking about genre. I want to talk a little bit about plot here. Um, Not a lot because you had a lesson on plot and you also have visuals on plot. So I want you to maybe pause this video and maybe go review the plot structures or the narrative structures. We have Aristotle's Poetics, three-act structure, and ABDCE. So go and review those. And kind of see what plot structure Sempervivum is using here. I want to review about exposition. Exposition, at its essence, and very crudely, is the background, right? But what is important about exposition is not just background, but it's context to what's happening in the story. Here's how I like to explain context. Let's say you are sitting in a room, maybe you're in a classroom, or maybe you're in the break room at work or something, and somebody walks in saying, "Oh my God, I'm so tired." And they're yelling it at the top of their lungs. Their arms are flailing. They look so defeated. You have no idea what's going on with them. You have no other information about what's going on. You can speculate, but you have no information. As far as you know, that person's having a bad day. You have no idea what happened before they walked in. Now, what if I told you they just got off the phone with their kids? They're parents and they are a parent and they got off the phone with their kids and they broke the garage door and it's going to cost a couple $1,000s to fix on top of having car problems. Now you know enough to understand why that person walked into the break room, arms flailing, saying, "I'm so tired." That is what context is. And that's what exposition does. Exposition gives us information to give us context of what's going on in the action of the story. I want you also to understand, I know I probably have said this already, but I'll say it again. I do not want you to think that the definition of plot is what happens in the story. How plot is taught in schools is wrong. And it took me until getting into my master's program to realize we were all taught plot incorrectly. Plot is not what happens in the story, but it's the structure of the story. How the story is put together. It's literally the bones. So that means the structure is very deliberate here. Why a writer decides to use one structure or another reveals a lot about what they actually want to argue about. So I want you also to review the questions that you would ask yourself for point of view and plot. If you're in my summer semesters, we haven't gotten quite to point of view yet, but I'm going to go over these questions here in the next slide so you understand what they are. All right, so these are the 4 questions you should be asking yourself when it comes to plot, specifically the structure. I would love it if you screenshot this so you have this in your notes. You also have another visual in your module where you can actually look at it and you can download it from there too. Okay, so let's go through these really quickly. You want to know what plot structure is being used and how do you know? What are the plot points to the story according to the structure? You want to definitely literally take the story apart. It's almost like you're unraveling like an onion, one layer at a time. How does this function? How does that function? If I peel one more level, one more layer, how does that function? How does that function if I take this layer out before this one, right? You want to know that. Why do we believe this specific version of the plot structure is used? What are the advantages and the disadvantages of using this plot structure? This is where you're getting a little bit deeper on the narrative structure of a story, right? You want to know if we use this other structure versus this structure, what would we know? What would we not know? If we get more dialogue in one than the other, then that's telling. The author wanted you to look at that dialogue. Number three, it's almost an offshoot of number two. If another structure was used, what information would the readers have learned sooner, learned later, or not at all? This really talks about the pacing of the story. What would we have known earlier? We learned the information that we needed to learn at the time that we needed to learn it. What if we would have known about Grace backstory sooner rather than later? What if it had started with how she became unmodified earlier? How would that have changed the story? Why did we need to know? Why did we need to start with the breakup first instead of the modification? And if another structure was used, speculate how the story and the argument of the piece would have changed. This is the fun part. After you gather all information, then you actually get to have a really good thought and say, the author really wanted us to see this particular character or this particular situation this way. So that way, when we find things out later, it hits us stronger or we understand better. So let's dive here into the story here. I'm going to take you through a couple of things. I want to point out a couple of things of the story, some interesting little tidbits, but it's going to be up to you to really dive into the plot here. Again, I'm just leading you to water. It's up to you to drink. So the story takes this name from the plant that's in the story. It's called Sempervivum. And I invite you to do some research about it and to ask yourself, what is pertinent about this plant to the story? We know that this plant translates to live forever. And we also understand that this plant doesn't need a bunch of water to survive, right? But there's other things about this plant that we aren't really told in the story. It's hinted in the story. So do a little bit of research, maybe do a quick Google search on it. And I want you to think, is this a symbol? Is this particular plant and the name of the story a symbol? If it is, how do we know? I leave this to your devices to figure out. So let's talk about this particular writer here. Gris Munoz is definitely a Texan for sure. She's actually lives in Texas now. She's a storyteller and a poet. She's actually this is actually from a collection that is filled with poetry, and it's the last item in the collection called Kotachuli Girl. And so this particular story is literally the last thing you read when you're done with that particular collection. She has won lots of awards, but this is the big one. She's been the finalist for the John A. Robertson Award for Best First Book of Poetry by the Texas Institute of Letters, which is a big deal here. And you can tell that she's a poet just by the way she's playing with form here, with this particular story. And I'm wondering if you noticed, right? Poets are interesting people, and what you always want to look at when you hear that a writer is a poet, you want to look at the economy of words and the way things are structured on the page. Poets play with words and play and placement a lot. So let's take a look at here. So when we talk about form for this particular story, most stories look like Harrison Bergeron and all the ones that we've read. And they go all the way to the left. There's actual paragraph marks. But for this particular story, I wonder if you've noticed the interesting indentations that are happening here. Let's look at this. So you have here a regular indentation on the left-hand side here. It starts off like a regular deal, and then you have the first indentation. So you have one speaker talking and then the other speaker talking. The indentation returns to the left-hand side, and you can see this kind of snakes in, right? It kind of like folds in almost like a leaf. And then you have this thing happening again. Both of these things indent, and then you have indent in, then you have this description that indents to the left, and then you have this talk indenting to the right, or this dialogue indenting to the right, this one indenting to the left. So it's almost like it goes back and forth, like almost every other speaker is indented in. And the fact, if you look at it and you shape it out here, it almost looks kind of like the in and out, how it goes in and out on the Sempervivum plant. It just goes in and out as it goes. So it looks like that. And it's interesting how it does that. There's a purpose to this form on the page here. It informs the reader of the character thoughts and the motivations, right? What goes in, what goes out, who's talking, and you have that separation of the dialogue there. So you understand that there's a separation happening there with the characters. And you understand that the structure is modified. The structure, I'm not talking about narrative structure, I'm talking about the literal structure on the page, how it looks on the page. It's been modified because gray has been modified. So again, let's talk about exposition here, the art of exposition. A lot of this story is told in exposition. So we get a lot of context of what happened before this moment between two lovers. This is the last time two lovers are going to see each other. There's the last time that they're going to talk. It's all out on the table. And we see this idea of home, this thought of home. What does home mean? You have been the person has felt most like home to me, and I still am leaving you. So what is that? Who is that? What is home to a person who has never felt very homey all their lives? It brings up also the idea of not being 100% human, but not being 100% something else either. Gray, is in no man's land here. She's not 100% human at all. She's also not 100% plant either. So what does that make her? What does it mean to be human? I'm told you, like, this is one of those stories that's going to ask, what does it mean to be human? And so we have a character here that's in search of home and trying to define home for themselves, trying to define identity for themselves. The plot structure here reflects that because it's out of order. The climax is subtle. There's a search for answers, and not finding any answers really until the end, and it's barely an answer. And even the name of the character signifies or symbolizes where this character is. She lives in the gray. She doesn't live in black. She doesn't live in white. She lives in the grayest part of the grayest part. She's neither here nor from there, which is a very big theme for Chicano and Mexican American communities. They don't feel all the way Mexican, but they don't feel all the way American. They're told that they don't belong here, but then they were born here. So that is actually a theme also for Chicano and Mexican Americans within that community. And as I said before, futurism genre deals with the issues of that particular community. All right, that's all I got for you today. I hope that this is helpful, and let me know how else I can help.